Steve Bannon convicted of contempt of Congress. Jurors reached that verdict after just 3 hours of deliberations. The former Trump White House advisor was on trial for defying a subpoena from the January 6th House Committee. NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Reilly live for us outside the U.S. District Court in D.C., where this verdict just came down. So, Ryan, it was a quick verdict here. Walk us through what just happened in court.
Yeah, I mean, factoring in lunch and picking a jury foreperson, I mean, that was a pretty quick verdict. Under 3 hours they spent deliberating. And essentially that's what prosecutors really tried to emphasize to the jury, was that this is a really straightforward, simple case. Steve Bannon was required to go forward and testify and provide documents to the January 6th committee. He didn't do so. He missed that deadline. He wasn't negotiating in good faith. And then Congress voted to hold him in contempt. And in fact, now he's been found guilty of contempt. One count for those records that he didn't provide, and one count for failing to provide testimony. And if you step back and remember for a moment, we've seen a number of actual White House officials who have testified in conjunction with the January 6th committee. And Steve Bannon had been out of the White House for 3 years before he actually before January 6th. So he didn't really have any remote claim of executive privilege, but that's what he was sort of trying to hold on to and use that as an excuse to not cooperate with this committee, which he's condemned on a regular basis, both here outside of the court and regularly on his podcast and his social media platforms.
So, Ryan, at this point, I know it's early. Any reaction from Bannon or from his attorneys yet? And what options might they have going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I would expect that to come momentarily. I think he has to fill out some paperwork before he actually leaves the court buildings. But obviously, there's cameras at each exit. And every time he's come out thus far during the course of this one-week trial, we've seen him make comments about this ongoing litigation. So especially after a verdict like this, I think we can pretty much expect to hear an unfiltered Steve Bannon when he actually emerges from this courthouse. But as far as the appeal goes, I think, yeah, an appeal is almost a certainty in this case. You know, he's going to face a 30-day minimum when he's sentenced in October, but depending on what happens with the appeal, that could get kicked back a little bit. And basically throughout this trial, his defense team has been making a record for that appeal because it's been so clear that that's what they're ultimately going to do. So, you know, this case could kick around for a while, but he isn't going to be able to delay this forever, and certainly not all the way to 2024, if that's what he's hopeful of Donald Trump coming back to office in 2025. So I think the more likely scenario, barring any appeal, is that Steve Bannon ends up doing some time in federal prison before in the next coming years.
So I want to back up a little bit here, Ryan, if we can. You've laid out for us exactly the case that the prosecution made in court here, and it wasn't one that required, it seems like, a lot of effort on the part of the DOJ. But talk a little bit about the case that the Bannon lawyers tried to make, the reaction, the response that they tried to use in court to have a different outcome here.
Well, you know, Steve Bannon's legal team was pretty restricted in the arguments they were allowed to present to the jury. They weren't allowed to tell the jury, for example, that Bannon was acting on advice of counsel. And that's something that's based on precedent, upstanding precedent, based on years ago contempt of Congress hearings. So that was something that the judge was bound by and said that the trial should be bound by, that he couldn't go forward and make that argument. So that's essentially what you're going to see on this appeal, is that this Bannon's team is going to come forward and say this trial was unfair because he wasn't able to present all of these different lines of defense that he said. That, you know, he's essentially going to come and say I was acting in good faith. He's going to say that he was, you know, always open to testifying before the committee. I mean, that, you know, you can judge for yourself whether that stacks up with the evidence based on Steve Bannon's public record and his public pronouncements, and in fact some of the social media posts that were brought up in the course of this trial. But that's what he's going to be making. That's the case that he's going to be making when he goes forward and appeals this, which is very clear that's going to move forward based upon what we heard from his defense team in court.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.